On the Metro, culture and arts take center stage.
I want this emotion behind it. I want this tone and whatever. So the whole thing that you're crafting.
When you go to a show, that's when you realize you're not alone, that you're suddenly with all these people that you resonate with, that you relate to.
It can be a real grassroots presentation. There's a long history within Detroit.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. Metro Detroit Arab American community is large and has been through several waves of immigration, going back to the $5 a day Ford jobs that attracted so many people here. Each of those periods brought new families, new culture, and a new heritage. From Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, and Yemen, Metro Detroit is home. But the places people immigrate from, they'll always be home. Part of what makes a place home are the sights, sounds, smells, or the world around us. Part of it is the food, the taste of home. And home is where we eat, where we meet, and where we grieve. The Arab American National Museum in East Dearborn has been building up a taste of home on the building's rooftop. The museum's Heritage Garden is in full bloom right now, and they host events like poetry readings and concerts. And the next one is August 8th, and there are events that run through October 3rd that include a performance by Kasan Belgrave. Joining me now to talk about the rooftop garden is Dean Nasreddine, curatorial specialist at the Arab American National Museum. Dean, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be here.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Okay, Dean, we want to start off with a description. The Arab American National Museum is a beautiful building, but even for people who visited or just drove by the museum, they've probably never been on the building's roof. So paint a picture for us. If I'm sitting at the Heritage Garden, what do I see?
So Al-Hadiqa is A&M's oral history-based rooftop garden. So when you walk out into the third floor terrace, you'll see bounties. It's just a sea of green and red and orange, and we've got plants that are native to the Arab world that were donated by those who worked with us and donated their oral histories, all covering the sort of cultural overlap with their gardening and horticulture practice. Obviously, gardening is a huge feature in most cultures. This is not to say that it's specific to Arab culture, but It is very, very important to the Arab community. And so we've got plants that are, we have peppers from Syria, we've got Lebanese mint, we've got Egyptian walking onion, a bunch of different native plants to Michigan as well, which really makes the garden, both in its stories and its produce, its plants, indicative of a Dearborn, Detroit Arab diaspora.
Oh, wow. And why did the museum choose to turn its rooftop into a garden?
It's kind of a funny story, and one of those sort of kismet moments where, one of our colleagues, this was probably 4 years ago at this point, the garden is entering its third year. Mm-hmm. It's a terrace rooftop that was built when the building was opened in 2005. And it used to be a sort of venue location, right? They would have there was a pergola out there at one point. They would have events. And then over time, it fell out of use and was just kind of gray to look at. Our offices are up on the third floor. And so a lot of our coworkers looking out there, one colleague in particular suggested the idea, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a garden out there? Yeah. And it was a snowball of an idea that kind of just took off. And it was really fun to think about, okay, so how can we make it intentional, right? Like, what kind of stories can we tell up there? Can we utilize this space and kind of engage a different kind of narrative that feels intra-community in the way that, we as Arab Americans can talk about our, grandmother's gardening practices and the little tips and tricks that elders often give us about how to make your tomatoes ripen faster, things like that, that we don't get to talk about in other places in the museum, for instance. But it's unique in that because gardening is such a widely loved hobby and craft and necessity at this point, right? It gives us the opportunity and platform to speak to a wider audience and also our local neighbors as well. I
want to get a little bit into the logistics here because a lot of times people will talk about these one-off ideas that have great intentions, whether it be gardens or, painting murals, but things don't actually get going because resources, time, whatever. How did the museum actually allocate the time or build the people to do it? Was it volunteer work? Was it additional teams? How did that happen?
Partnerships were really integral. Community-informed partnerships were the biggest, I think, boost for getting the garden off the ground. We could not have done Al-Hadiqa without our partners at Garden Juju Collective. They operate out of Plymouth on Gateway Farms is the place they operate out of. It's a 13-acre food forest that they've cultivated there. And their entire approach is horticulture and planting that heals, that it's reflective of the community that lives on the land. There's a lot of indigenous practice kind of imbued in how they organize. And so we partnered with Garden Juju, and it kind of took off from there. We held a community town hall where we invited members of Dearborn to come. It was during Ramadan 3 years ago, so it was an iftar that we held. And we had a huge cross-generational community come out, so everything from 12-year-olds with their parents to elders and everywhere in between, where we just kind of posed the question, if this garden exists, what would you like to see? What do you feel would be representative of the place you come from, of Arab Americans, collectively, of Arab Americans specifically to Dearborn? And also, what are the things that you do not want up there? Was a huge boost for us. That was a big surprise for us. We had talked about the idea of, what if we have a fountain or a water feature? Because those ideas are so present. Fountains are huge in Arab gardens. But we learned very quickly from some of the elders, that is not a good idea. So there is no water feature up on the garden. It's really been beautiful. We've also opened up for the opening, we worked with the oral history volunteers and accepted some donations of plants from their garden, either seeds that they've brought from overseas, cuttings from their garden, indoor plants in some cases that have a special meaning to them or that they've cultivated. So one example of this that always sticks with me is one of the volunteers, Nasreddine. She arrived to Dearborn following the Lebanese Civil War in the 1980s, and her story is compelling. They absolutely came with nothing. And she's cultivated an amazing, beautiful garden in her home that is representative of the village that she left in Lebanon. So in her oral history, which are accessible on the garden rooftop as well, they're QR code accessible where you can listen to an excerpt of each of their oral histories. Wow. She says that every time she eats a cucumber from her garden, she tastes her village. And that just sticks with me. And I think that's the real pathos and ethos of the space. I want to sit on that for a second, because you were talking about that before, how people have donated their oral histories to the garden. You can go up there. They're QR code activated. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. You can listen to folks talk about their own personal stories. Can you give me another example of another story that someone might find in the garden? Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting in some folks talk about there's a real cultural connection, and then other times, the gardener is of Arab descent, but they're mostly focusing on the actual physicality of gardening and the centering and grounding that happens when you just stick your hands in the dirt. So some of it isn't even about the cultural aspect, but it is just a component of their life, right? Being in touch with the earth. Yes. Touching grass. Yeah, as they say, absolutely. And I think that it lends itself to a really important conversation around land and how do we use our land? How do we steward our land, especially in the wake of ecocide that's happening across the world, right? And I think that it's a real privilege to be able to do this work. I think it's a unique offering to see at a museum as well, because we are decidedly not a botanical garden. We're not like the conservatory on Belle Isle. It's nothing like that, so to speak. But it's just a place that we feel our community can gather to see some green space in a really, really concrete city in particular. Dearborn is very... it's the Motor City. It's the origin of Ford. We're very car focused. And so finding green space anywhere can be a challenge sometimes. You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. And if you're just joining us, my guest is Dean Nasreddine, a curatorial specialist at the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn.
The museum has a rooftop heritage garden and is hosting events this summer and fall. Their next event will feature poetry on August 6th. We were talking about some of the plants and some of the other things people could find in the garden. How does it show up on the table? Are people able to pick ingredients there? Is it mostly flowers? What does that look like?
So pretty much all of the plants in the garden are edible or usable in some way. So a lot of it is, we've got a ton of different herbs. We've got our cucumbers are producing a lot right now. Eggplants are coming in as well. Tomatoes still have some time. But we do ask that guests, when you join us for open hours on Fridays, refrain from picking. There's a staff member, usually my colleague Shada, who is our oral historian, our community historian. She's actually responsible for going out and collecting all of those oral histories, and she did an incredible job, like knocking on doors to try to find people to share their stories, folks who had gardens that we could see from the street, you know. And so we always offer produce. Like there are produce that we've picked and have out for free. We have paper bags that people can use to bag their own herbs that we've harvested, but we are very meticulous about our care in the garden, and so we ask you to look with your eyes, enjoy rubbing the leaves and smelling. We do a lot of sensory activations up there as well with youth groups and kids. We've just had our first Hadiqa tour as well, and we have one coming up a little later this month too, so you can get a closer access to the garden that way too.
Now, to the museum. The museum has a robust archive and a library filled with cultural artifacts and papers and letters. You can name many things. How does the archive that the museum has inform the garden itself? What stories are connected?
Yeah, so it's mostly connected to how Arab Americans have made their lives in the U.S. We talk about gardening as a practice, and many Arabs can tell you stories about which family members, if many, or, you know, if you don't garden, your grandmother gardens, your uncle gardens, there's somebody in your circle who gardens and makes sure that the family has access to fresh produce. And so it's naturally a practice that came with many immigrants as they came to Dearborn and Detroit. And at least for me speaking personally, it's a really fond memory to be in my mother's garden and be drying mint and you know, really sitting with the idea of what it means to root yourself in new soil, the way that people and plants have to do.
Yeah, and I know now this garden and the museum, it's also a space for entertainment, for gathering. You all are trying to build it to be that way as well. There's a theater in the basement. The event space, there's an event space attached to the museum as well. What's different about the performances you have on the roof as opposed to some of the maybe other spaces you have in the museum? Yeah,
so it's a more casual space. We try to align the garden as more of a low stakes, come hang out, come sit with us. We've had poetry readings up there. We've done some plein air painting events up there, sketch sessions. We've had a jam session, which was really fun last year, where we invited musicians to bring their instruments and just come chill. It was a little bit of an experiment, but it was really exciting to be there and just see how organically performances just started to happen between musicians.
What is the impetus behind that? Why making an intentional casual space?
I think we need it. I think it's really, there's a conversation around third spaces that has been really popular in the past few years. And when we were thinking about Al-Hadiqa and opening it, we wanted to be intentional about creating a green third space in Dearborn because, looking at the landscape and the offerings accessible in the city. Very rarely do we find a rooftop anywhere that is open and accessible for the public. And if you do, there's usually alcohol or some sort of bar attached to it, which isn't really a whole lot of people's bag. So it was something that we wanted to try to create. Sitting in the courtyard in a garden is really, really core to Arab culture. And so we wanted to try to recreate that in some way at the museum and open it up as a space for our local neighbors to come and join us and sit and be surrounded by the sights and smells and colors in Al-Hadiqa.
Without the pressure of having to pay for a drink or
exactly.
anything like that.
Yeah.
The relationship between artists and nature is like an emerging theme from artists and curators we've spoken to on this show. How does the relationship to the natural world show up in the culture people brought to Metro Detroit from their respective homelands, be it, 100 years ago or maybe it's this month?
So the natural world has really influenced a lot of, traditional historic sort of Arab and Islamic art. The courtyard, as I mentioned, was, there are descriptions of specific plants in the Quran, for instance, right? Not to say that all Arabs are Muslim, of course, but just as an example. So it's a through line in a lot of visual depictions of gardens. But I think more specifically to Al-Hadiqa, it's been a real source of inspiration for a lot of the artists that come through the building. We also have an artist in residence program that we run at the museum, and some of our artists have created work in inspiration for the garden. We just had a print donated to the collection actually last year by one of the artists, Sarah Farhat, who was in residence with us, I believe, 2 years ago now, that she created it was a collage that she created of photos that she took and gathered in the garden. So it's really special to see how it's continuing to grow in reference to more traditional arts and depictions of gardens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Dean, I appreciate this conversation. Dean Nasreddine is a curatorial specialist at the Arab American National Museum. The museum's Heritage Garden is the venue for several events this summer and fall, including a performance by Kasan Belgrave in September. Their next event is called Rooftop Rendezvous. It's August 8th. Dean, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, for explaining the Rooftop Garden and its importance for the community.
I appreciate that so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can't talk about music, poetry in the Arab world without playing some Fairuz. For those who don't know, she's the queen of Arabic pop music and rose to prominence during the golden era of Arabic music, starting in the 1950s. This one's called Sheti Yadina. All right, WDET Sounds Like Detroit returns August 14th at Batch Brewing Company. This special concert showcases artists from Detroit's Tiny Desk concert. There are artists handpicked by the WDET listeners and hosts. The doors will open at 6 p.m. Music starts at 7. And I'll be talking with one of the performers for the show coming up next. Stay right there. We'll be right back on the Metro.